Good evening. Welcome to the regular meeting of Sonoma's Planning Commission. And we need to start with a roll call.
All right. Commissioner DAMBACH?
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Here.
Commissioner Willers?
Here.
Commissioner WIRICK?
Here.
Alternate Nugent?
Here.
Vice Chair Barbose?
Here.
And Chair Barnett?
Here. Thank you. And we'll see if Commissioner O'Gorman arrives. If she does not, Ms. Nugent, you'll be able to join us up here on the dais at the. So we'll give it a few minutes. I guess we will start with the pledge. Mr. Guin, would you like to say the Pledge of Allegiance for us tonight? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there any correspondence that we need to note, Matthew?
No, there was no late correspondence received.
Okay. Tonight I'm going to alter our meeting agenda slightly to welcome someone and to say goodbye to someone else. So the indulgence of the commission, will just take a minute or two to do that. First, I want to introduce, for those of you who have not met, David Guin, who is the new city manager for the city of Sonoma. He's appropriately has a very nice tie on. I want to point that out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to thank you first. I know this is a volunteer job. It's an important job. It's something that in every city is admirable. And so I appreciate you taking the time and effort to do this. And I'm looking forward to working with you on a lot of big projects coming up soon. So, and I also want to acknowledge Laura for stepping in. I know this is her last day and you're going to mention her, but thank you for putting the time in and supporting the city. We really appreciate it. So I'm excited to be here. Hoping to meet each one of you over time. And again, thank you for the opportunity to come say hi.
Thank you, David. You do a half Windsor or a square? We'll have a discussion about that. I'll make an appointment. All right. Then the second half of our special beginning is to acknowledge Laura Simpson. Laura was hired by a previous interim city manager. Not long thereafter, found herself working with a new interim city manager, and then, in order to just complete the circle, departs with shortly after the hiring of the new permanent city manager. So you have a record-setting history. I just want to thank you for your professionalism, your courtesy, your promptness in responding to any questions that came up, your putting up with meeting with me and listening to me prattle on, and generally holding things together during a very tumultuous period in the city's history. So I want to thank you. I do have something for you.
Well, thank you very much. And I just want to say it has been my pleasure to work here at the City of Sonoma. It's a beautiful place to work and great to get to meet all of you and work with you. Even though it's been a short time, it's gone kind of quickly, but a lot has happened. And thanks to staff, Christina and Matt, and other staff who've stepped in, Elena, and it's just been great to work with the staff here. And of course, David will carry on the great, transition period here that we're in with the new director coming soon. So thank you, and it's been my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. And Christina, did you have something to say?
Me, I never have anything to say. No, I just wanted to add on and thank you so much. And Chair, you forgot, and there's another interim. You forgot Wayne too. So it's been 4 city managers. No, but you've been such a stabilizing force, and the amount of work that has been able to get through the department in this amount of time. The residential component was passed last night. The fee that we've been working on for 2 years, and the general plan contract, and lots of controversial projects that have come through, and it's been a very, very seamless transition. So thank you so much for all your time, and we have a little something for you too from the staff. Oh, thank you. Hopefully more tasty.
You're all set now.
I'm set. I've got it all right here. All my favorite things.
All right, that's great. Well, I think it was a pleasure to be able to do this at the beginning of the meeting when there's some members of the public here, and to acknowledge both of you. So thank you so much. All right, now we'll move on to any comments from members of the public. These are comments on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Are you a member of the public?
Good evening, Ron Wellender, coming not as a resident, but actually as a city council person. Wanted to just share with you a couple things. Wanted to thank you, first of all, for taking the time in response to my request to go through the old general plan and to at least look at it with the filter of recognizing what may still be germane and what may need to be updating. I appreciate that task. The good news is last night the council did approve the going forward with the updating of the general plan. Bad news is they're not exactly doing it the way I was kind of hoping, to integrate your comments ahead of time and be able to take those comments to the consultant. But back to the good news is that there will be an opportunity to have a joint meeting with City Council with the new consultant. And it will be at that time, hopefully, we will have a very robust and productive conversation and dialogue amongst ourselves, seeking to clearly have a vision, I suppose, as far as how we want to go forward in creating this new document in what will hopefully be a very efficient way for dollar purposes. But thank you again for doing what you did, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ron.
I would add just that if you have compiled comments, I mean, you are still able to submit those when the consultant starts, so they won't be lost.
Yes, and I have received notes and commentary from a number of commissioners. There's still time for the ones who haven't submitted anything to do so, and those will be then compiled, passed on to both the consultant and the city council in advance of our meeting, available for the public to scrutinize as well, and just become part of the conversation. So that process is happening. All right, any other comments from the public on items not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar, the only item on the consent calendar.
And through the chair, I just want to note too that there are no hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you, Matthew. You're a watchful and diligent cyber sleuth. Okay, the only item on the consent calendar tonight is the approval of some minutes from the meeting of March 16th of this year. Are there any changes or comments? No? Can I hear a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes from March 16th, 2023.
And I'll second that motion.
All right, thank you. Can get a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Would we like to have Commissioner Nugent up at the dais at this point, or?
Sure, with the proviso that if Ms. O'Gorman shows up, you'll have to step down again. And look at that. You even get your name tag changed. What an operation. Oh, no. We're a first-class operation here. Okay. We have motion and a second. Now we're ready for a roll call vote, Matthew.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Dambach,
Yay?
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbose,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
All right. The next order of business is a public hearing, item 5.1, which is discuss, consider, and take possible action to approve a planned development permit application. And with this, we'll begin with the staff report.
Thank you all. As mentioned, the project before the Planning Commission is a planned development permit at 443 Casabonne Lane. No, I don't want subtitles. Here is a location map, and for those of you who are familiar with the project area, this is right behind Vallejo's home and the General's Daughter, and between 5th Street West and 4th Street West, adjacent to the Vallejo's home open space. The project is located in the Northwest Planning Area and is zoned medium density residential. The allowable density is 7 to 11 units per acre with a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. The required setbacks for the project site is a 20-foot front setback. The side setbacks are a 5-foot minimum, 15-foot combined, plus that wonky little provision for 2-story residences, which is 2 additional feet for every 5 feet or fraction thereof of height above 20 feet, and a rear setback of 20 feet. There's a bit of history to this current vacant lot. We don't have a lot of vacant lots left in the city of Sonoma. This is a remainder parcel from the Willows Wild subdivision, which was approved in 2005 by the Planning Commission. It was a 15-unit subdivision, and 14 of the lots were built by the original developer, and this particular lot was left vacant, and it was intended to be vacant in the planned development permit that was approved. The planned development permit approved reductions in minimum setbacks and lot sizes. The project plans included development plans for the 14 lots to be developed, but just a quick diagram of a site plan for lot 14. There's no building envelope, whereas the other lots have building envelopes that are established. So the original approval has a potential building footprint, but nothing that was approved. So here is the approved planned development permit. If you look really, really closely, there are setbacks marked in there, but it's not very legible. Here's a view of the site as it is today. It's currently fenced as part of the adjacent property. And we have some photos of the adjacent residences that were all built as part of the Willows Wild subdivision. If you recall previously, our procedure for a permit that had a planning commission entitlement and a design review was for the planning commission to go first, and so the design review was after the approval of the planned development permit. I sent those plans around just a little while ago in case anyone wanted to take a look at those. Here's some more pictures of the roadways. I'll just draw your attention back to that original map, and I think you can see where it says future house, but none of the setbacks were approved as part of that planned development permit. So we are here this evening to consider the planned development permit to allow the construction of a new 2,513 square foot single family residence that will be 2 stories with a 168 square foot covered porch, a 480 square foot garage on the 5,231 square foot lot. The applicant is requesting a planned development permit to have reduced setbacks on the sides. The front setback would meet standards required by the Sonoma Municipal Code. The residence would maintain a 20-foot front setback, and the porch would have a 15-foot front setback. Our code does allow porches to encroach into the front setback. The street side setback is a 20-foot setback. I think it's all, but I'll say I believe most of our street side setbacks and front setbacks are the same, so that we're treating all of our street frontages with the same level of integrity. And the applicant is requesting a 10-foot street side setback where the code requires 20 feet. On the other side of the property, which is an interior side setback adjacent to the field on the other side, the applicant is requesting a 5-foot setback where a 9-foot setback is required for the 26-foot tall, 7-inch residence. And the rear setback is being proposed at 24 feet, which complies with the required standard. So the intention of a planned development permit is to give the Planning Commission discretion and authority to provide projects with concessions to the general plan. And on the screen are the findings of approval. The recommended action by staff is to, yes, I will. Happy to read those for those who can't see it. The first finding is the planned development permit is consistent with the general plan, any applicable specific plan, and the intent and applicable objectives of this section. Number 2, the design of the development is consistent with the intent of applicable regulations and design guidelines in the development code. The various use and development elements of the planned development relate to one another in such a way as to justify exceptions to the normal standards of the development code. The design flexibility allowed by the planned development permit has been used to creatively address identified physical and environmental constraints and or meet identified housing needs. And number 5, the proposed development will be well integrated into its setting and will relate appropriately to adjacent uses and will retain desirable natural features of the site and surrounding area. Ready? Staff's recommended action is to adopt a resolution approving the planned development permit subject to findings and conditions of approval, including action to approve to find the project categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to CEQA Section 15303 for new construction. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Just for historical clarification, when the original project of the other homes were initiated and completed, I had a conversation with Bob Kennard, who was the owner of this parcel along with the balance of the vacant property behind the general's daughter. And one of his negotiation positions in the sale of the property overall, which included those other properties, was that he wanted to retain that parcel for the potential for a future home that he was going to build, which is why it said proposed future home on it. It wasn't intended ultimately to be left vacant forever. There was always an idea of building it, but you can see by the way the fence is configured that it was incorporated into the totality of that parcel that includes the barn that's there now and the vacant portion that goes all the way to 4th Street. Okay, so we've now had the staff report. Let's move to questions from the commission. Who'd like to start? This is for questions, not comments. And yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I had previously emailed Christina, but I cannot find the approval of what the setbacks were in the original 2005 approval. As Christina said, there's an image, but you can't read the image.
And I don't know if any setbacks were determined at that point because there was no specific development proposal.
Yet it says specifically that they approved a reduction in setbacks.
On that parcel or for
No,
the other?
for the other parcels.
This parcel, as I understand it correctly in reading the, I think, 111 pages that were included with this agenda item, was purposefully not included in the planned development, what at that time was called the PUD or planned unit development that proceeded. This was always accepted out and was not therefore part of the specifications for any of the provisions that were applied to the rest of that planned development. And that's why I don't think there are any specifics. As I say, it was always Bob Kennard's intention to retain that parcel and build something there, so I think he did everything he could to keep it out of any conditions that were applied to any of the surrounding properties.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll make a comment on that when we get to the comment stage.
Okay?
I believe you're asking about the setbacks for the 14 lots that were developed. There are indicators on the map. I can't read them. The staff report describes that they were made, but it's very hard to read in the imaging that was done.
Okay, other questions? No? Okay. Then we will at this time ask, is there a representative of the applicant here tonight? Well, please come up and give us your name for the record and add anything to the discussion you feel would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Name's Daniel Crowley. Thank you for considering the application. I appreciate it. We're really intending just to add to the housing stock that we have here and that the city needs here in Sonoma. The intention was to design something that fit the massing of the other 14 homes and sort of respected the architecture of what is now the HOA there by building something really that's not terribly exciting. Unfortunately, it's going to fit right in. So we hired the same architect to do the design. We think we're not asking for too much with the side street setbacks and the side setback on the other side of the property. And we're happy to answer any questions, but ultimately we'd like to get building on this property.
Any questions?
Mr. Crowley, I'll just sort of get right to the point. I'm a little concerned that this Matson project will go the way that the Boys Springs container project went and the houses on the corner of Moon Mountain Road, namely that they've have construction fencing around them for literally years with no discernible progress being made. And I would really hate to see that here. I asked the city attorney and staff if we could include in the conditions of approval for this project a condition to the effect that any building permit that would be obtained would require completion of construction by a stated date, up for discussion by my fellow council members or commission members. And also, an additional thought I had was whether the developer would be willing to post a bond to secure performance of that condition in the event that we fell into the pattern that we have seen with some of these other projects. So the easiest thing to do would be just to find out if the developer would agree to such a condition.
To both of your questions, the answers are yes and yes. Further, I think we've got our hands full with owner-builder projects at the moment, so we'd be happy to hire out to a general contractor, and for whatever that's worth, they are interested in getting projects off the books and built quickly. So, okay. Yeah, we understand your concern.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and I do have a question for you.
Sure.
If you look at the map, Christina, can we bring up, there was an overhead lot line map somewhere in there. In my recollection of the map is that the eastern property line, there we go. Well, this doesn't really show it very well. There was another map I saw that showed the actual property lines. There we go. All right. And I don't know why it's so light, but can you see this one?
Yeah.
Okay. If you can see the area highlighted in blue, the eastern side is to the right on this map. You can see that the corner of the property to the south, there's a little bit of a, I don't know what you would call it, indentation, or this was a separate lot, but it's all actually one. At one point, it was one parcel. I don't know how the property line was determined for this project. My question is, since the property owner owns both this lot in question and the balance of the lot that you can see in this, and the request that's coming before us tonight has to do with reducing setbacks in order to accommodate a house of the size proposed, my question is, would the property owner be prepared to do a lot line adjustment, bring the lot line to the, essentially the corner, that would then add more space and potentially eliminate the need for a variance on the setbacks at all. Since he owns the whole thing anyway.
Just as so, just for clarification, we're talking about the corner to the east of the blue.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, got it. Yeah, so I think if I had to guess, I think it's because there's a storm drain easement that actually runs 5 foot of either side of that property line. That may be why that line is where it is.
Yes.
The answer is yes. If that winds up being a condition of approval,
Yeah.
that's something we'd be amenable to. Yeah. I mean, I think in practice, what's going to have to happen is there can't be we're not putting a fence right in the middle of a storm drain easement. So
Right.
it's going to have to go 5 foot either side.
Yeah.
And 5 foot to the west is the house. So 5 foot to the east would reasonably be, I think, exactly where you're describing.
Right, well, and you can't build a structure over the easement, so that wouldn't change the conditions. It would give you a nice, clean edge to that property, and as I say, it would, from a practical standpoint, unless I hear some arguments otherwise, it would eliminate the need for variance or even a planned development designation on this.
There would still be, well, so there would still be the request, I suppose, for a setback on the street side as well, because you can't bring the house any closer to that storm drain easement.
Uh-huh.
So the driveway kind of has to stay where it is. So moving it any further that direction would still result in a request for a setback reduction on the other side.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. O'Neill.
Looking at the comparable properties, I'm wondering why this one would be so much larger, because the existing properties run around 1,700 to 1,900 square feet, and the request for this one is about 2,500 square feet. And in our market today, I do think that there's a great need for more affordability. So what would the developer's willingness to be to either make a smaller unit or to make it 2 units?
I'm not sure we could do 2 units on a parcel that size or an increased size, or of an increased size, I should say. The reason we're not intending to sell this property. We intend to use it for employee housing, an employee with families. So it is the size it's designed by intent. That we wanted a house this size, so that's what we're asking for. That's pretty
But
well
you're
it.
asking for a variance on the setbacks, and
Sure.
you're saying that it's going to fit in with the existing houses, but it's actually significantly larger than the other houses.
If we reduce the square footage, are you suggesting we could reduce the square footage of the upstairs, because the ground floor is already rather tight? I mean, it's more vertical than it is horizontal, the design of the house.
I'm not suggesting how to design a house. I'm not an architect, though there are some up here who are. But I'm just looking at from the standpoint of housing stock for Sonoma, but also for making sure that it fit with other houses in the neighborhood.
Sure.
And that's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the concern. Yeah, we have been in touch with the HOA, and they've given us their blessing to move forward on this. It's not a concern they brought forward. So, but if it's a conversation we're willing to have, if it's an unacceptable bulk.
I can pull up, there is an easement there. I can pull it up.
Okay, are there other questions?
Show us that easement.
That's better. Yeah, that shows the property line, and which runs right down the center of that storm drainage easement there on the eastern side.
For those of you who may be curious, if you've been to Safeway and looked at the vacant lot on Safeway, that's on the Safeway property, there's actually a creek that has been undergrounded for a portion of that undeveloped lot, and then it appears on the surface and moves its way down to along 4th Street, and then disappears again when you get past the hospital. That creek has its attachment to these drainage creeks and easements that originate on this property, and there used to be a creek coming down from the hills that would pass right by the General's Daughter and Lacrimontis, or Willow's Wild, as it was called. And this was an open-air, continuing waterway, which of course was very attractive to General Vallejo, and was part of the whole Vallejo estate there. But it has since been undergrounded so that you really can't even see the source of it anymore. But these drainage easements all relate to that water course that ends up down and visible by the hospital. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. We'll see if any come up during the discussion.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and are there other members of the public who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will go
There
ahead
is,
and move it.
through the chair. There is a hand raised on Zoom.
Great, thank you, Matthew.
All right, Mr. Hunt, you should be able to go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Commission. For what it's worth, the video is not projecting on Zoom, and the Sonoma TV video is delayed behind the actual meeting, but it's not been a problem from my end, but for others it might be. As Daniel said, the key for us, we designed the project 18 years ago, was to try and fit a house that looked like it had been there from the outset of the project. In regards to the setbacks, and I think, Christina, you can correct me if I have this wrong, but we're not asking for a variance per se because this is a planned unit development and we're trying to extend that planned development, which was the vehicle for approving the previous 14 lots to this lot. We did not use standard setbacks across the other 14 lots. That is to say, we didn't just say we're going to use a 10-foot front yard setback on all lots and a 5-yard setback and so forth. We designed houses and lots together. And so when you look at that overall site plan, you'll see a variety of different front and side and rear yard setbacks for each of the properties. My guess when we picked, or my estimation when we picked this back up, is this house is very much in spirit of the setbacks of those other 14. And in fact, if you look at the diagram that was done and included in the previous approval for this lot, it had a detached garage that significantly reduced the backyard setback. And we thought it was an improvement that we were at least pushing away from that. But again, and there was a document, and it's, as far as I can tell, it isn't in any of the materials you have. There was a document that showed setback numbers. It was not part of the approval. We used that document as the guideline when we picked up the design 18 years later. As I say, that site plan was not part of the approval 18 years ago. So the fact it was in the file doesn't mean much, I suppose, one way or the other. But again, our whole effort was to try to keep this within the spirit of what had been done before, and there were not blanket setbacks. It was a case of we varied them lot by lot based on the design of the houses and the relationship of the homes to one another. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that Daniel can't cover, and we'll remain here.
Any questions for Mr. Hunt? Seeing none? Okay, thank you, Mr. Hunt. I hope you'll stay on the line in case something else comes up.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right. Any other further public comment? Matthew, anyone online?
There are no other hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you. Okay, well, any others from the audience? Without any, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. And I now would open it up. Who would like to start? Mr. Willers.
Christina, I have a question. In plan development permit in the section 1954-070, there's a paragraph that follows the item number 4.
Oh, hold on. This is in the muni code.
So municipal code.
This is in the plan development permit.
Yeah.
I was trying to see if I could find the documents.
It's hard to find it in the municipal code.
1954-070.
Yep.
And where are we looking now?
I'm looking down below the first item 4. It says a planned development permit shall not be granted solely for the purpose of maximizing development potential or for merely allowing the development of an individual unit, of individual units on separate lots. So, and I think that's an important objective of the development code, is that the requests for the setbacks or exceptions essentially are beyond what would be allowed via an exception, and therefore would step into the territory of variances. And we all know that the variance findings are very difficult to make. And here the planned unit development, which is essentially looking for a creative solution to a unique property in a unique situation, to be used, and the Planning Commission allowing flexibility to create a design that allows for those unique characteristics to have a creative solution. What we have here is, in my opinion, is a rectangular lot, much like the rectangular lots in the rest of the PUD. And Christine, I don't want to bug you too much, but could you pull up the figure ground image that you had of the subdivision that had the blue lot on it? Because I think it's a really good example.
Where did my presentation go?
I'm going to, I'll just continue. I think that this, so there we go. So if you just look at the relative size of that lot compared to the remainder of the lots in the PUD, you can see that a solution was done in keeping with all of the rest of the properties on properties that are basically the same size. All of those properties, unfortunately, were smaller because they had to be, because they were on small lots. And in essence, there was a creative solution done in the original PUD. And that PUD was allowed to have flexibility in the setbacks because that planned development as a whole organization was a compatible, good solution to a unique property, which was this L-shaped original property. This property, as a holdout property, does not follow those patterns, in my opinion. You know, where the original garage was located in the sketch that we saw with the footprint of the house, that is a pattern in the development. The garages are separate from the buildings. And when they're not, they're pulled back and recessed, like in this plan. The other part about the way in which this house is positioned on this property is it doesn't relate at all to the subdivision, to the planned development that preceded it. The side of the building that is asking for the largest setback, that has the setback request that is most impactful, is a 2-story edge facing the fronts of other houses. You know, and 10 feet off of the sidewalk or off of the roadway. So in my opinion, this doesn't come close to qualifying for a planned development permit approval. It really does not reach the level of kind of creativity or compatibility in the planned development to be granted these exceptions. And so I just feel that it hasn't gone far enough. It's a 2,500 square foot lot house that happens to fit on this lot. And we've already been told that that's what they want. And if that's what they want, then they should try to find a way to do that within the zoning ordinance without asking for a planned unit development or exceptions or variances. But if they're going to ask for this kind of leeway or flexibility that the Planning Commission has the right to give them, they have to step up to the bar too. So that's my opinion about this. It just hasn't gone far enough at all. And I think a viable solution here would be to pay attention to the patterns of the other buildings. And if that means that that building, in order to be compatible with that, has to be smaller in order to be compatible, that's what it is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Willers. Other commentary? Donna?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, and that was my concern in reading this, and that's why I was asking questions about what were the other setbacks. And based on the comments of Chairman Burnett, which said that this was separated from that PUD by Mr. Kennard and is physically still separated by that fence. And also, thanks to the comments we received today, I appreciate that there's an attempt externally to make it look like the other buildings, but I would agree. I think that it seems like a standalone building that happens to be in a development. And I, too, would like to see a solution that kind of fits in a little bit more with the setbacks that are in the code.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
Is there a way to see that section that was we had on the screen previously? Yeah, I'm sort of of the same mind. I have a hard time kind of getting to the threshold here where we're finding something unique or distinct about this. And in my opinion, there's not as enough effort to kind of conform to the rest of this development. That's where I'm sitting right now.
Okay, thank you. Others?
I would agree with both WIRICK and Mr. Willers.
Please use your microphone's not on.
There's nothing unique about this property that requires this except for the size of the house being proposed. And I think that given the fact that it's larger than the other houses in the subdivision, the most logical thing would be to downsize it so it doesn't need special consideration on setbacks to fit in. But so I agree with those comments.
Okay, thank you. Ms. O'Neill or Nugent, do you have any comments?
I'm in agreement with Commissioner Willers in that there's a lack of conformity that I'd like to see. And is it just the desire that it to be a bigger dwelling? Can it be reduced in square footage so that it is more conforming?
Thank you.
I think we're all in agreement here, but I would also like to consider the proposal of making 2 units there. There's some out on 4th Street that are about 1,300 square feet. And I know you say this is for employee housing and you want that large house, but I think that you should also consider the possibility of 2 smaller units. I would be much more open to looking at some consideration of variances if we were providing more housing.
Or if I may just add to that, possibly, including a second unit if there was a way to do that, because one of the criteria could be if it included affordable housing, so if you were to include a second unit or an ADU, perhaps that would help as in terms of the benefit.
Okay, well, I'll chime in. I think the incorporation of a garage into the house itself has placed an undue constraint on your footprint. Admittedly, to place a garage in a rear yard or in other places, as the other units have done, will reduce yard space, but the lot size is what it is, and as you've noted, at least from perhaps not from a building siting standpoint, but from a sense of feeling constrained, a moving of that lot line might relieve that sense of space because it would be open. And so I'd like to see an idea come forward that, as most of the other units in this development have, a separate garage, separate from the building, which I think may solve some other problems. And otherwise, I think, we basically have a pretty clear consensus up here. So at this point, because we're taking a formal action tonight, it would be to deny the application as submitted, or tell me what the best way to structure a motion.
We would need to return with findings for denial.
Okay, so we still need to take a roll call vote to deny and then and then return with the findings for
would, I think-
denial?
Yes, there are other options to continue it to allow the applicant to, submit a revision so that you're not denying it. And
Okay.
yeah.
Well, and I would be open to a continuance if the commission would be. All right, I'd like to hear a motion, please.
I'm gonna make a comment first, because I wanna be clear that I'm not, closing down in my opinion, I'm not closing down the use of the plan development permit
Mhm.
to make a solution that does appropriately respond to the conditions of this neighborhood. I just don't wanna use it for this building, because I don't think the building qualifies for its use. And in my mind, the building needs to face the other buildings on the street, the ones across the street from it, not the side of the building across the other street. And that may be the beginning of the solution that you'll find. So,
Well, I'll have to reopen a public hearing, but if you want to come up and respond, that's fine. I will reopen the public hearing. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, no, all of your concerns are heard and valid. We're gonna go, we're happy to go back to the drawing board. They might not entirely be satisfied because we do initially have to get HOA approval before coming before yourselves. So whether they accept the idea of 2 lots, whether they accept the idea of a driveway on Bodine, I think that the other road is, that's really entirely up to them. But at least we've nailed down things like landscaping and paint colors were allowed. So thank you.
Okay, I'll close the public hearing again, and I'm still waiting for a motion for a continuance, please.
Through the chair, I just want to note as well, there's no hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you, Matthew.
I'll make a motion to continue to a date uncertain.
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Dambach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yep.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbose,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for coming and working with us. Okay. All right, moving right along. The next item is an item for discussion. It's a study session. I want to remind the commission that a study session is not the opportunity to take a hard and fast or definitive position on a project. Please try to frame your comments so that you don't express an absolute feeling or decision about the application. We're here to have a somewhat more informal discussion. I see Mr. Ross in the audience. I'm sure he will have comments to make before us. And so with that, we'll move on to 6.1, the study session for a use permit, parking exception, and design review applications for an addition and exterior modification to the Sebastiani Theater. I also see some old friends in the audience, and glad to see your shining faces. So with that, we'll open it with a staff report.
Thank you, and I believe the applicant has a presentation as well, so I will try to focus on what's different so we don't have duplicity. The project site, as we are all very familiar with, is a 26,005 square foot lot right on the Sonoma Plaza. It's currently developed with the 2-story, 21,525 square foot, 30-foot tall building that was constructed in 1933 as a movie house. The three existing tenants include the theater, the town square, and offices. The Sebastiani Theater is identified as a contributing resource to the Sonoma Plaza National Register listed historic district and is individually eligible for the National Register as well. It is surrounded by commercial development, and this is actually, I think, a little bit wrong on the back. It's mixed use because it backs up to Lot B. It's the City of Sonoma's Lot B. Here we are mid-block on the east side of the plaza. The project is located in the downtown district, zoned commercial. There are no front or rear or side setbacks. Nope, there's no generator. Sorry, copy and paste error. The theater was built by Samuel Sebastiani in 1933, and it's operated as a theater ever since then. It was designed by well-known theater architect James W. Reed. In 1986, it was sold to the Sebastiani Builders Investors, and the council leases the theater. I'm sure they're going to touch on some of their history, so I'll skip over that. The purpose of this evening is to review the proposed project and to give feedback. The primary issue for discussion is going to be parking. And so we were going to be following up with a study session on parking that will be a continuation of some other discussions that we've had. So we're going to touch parking a lot tonight. So the primary component of the project is an addition, a 4,967 square foot addition that would accommodate a new screening room, accessible bathroom, food prep kitchen, fire exiting corridor on the north and east sides of the theater. There would be ADA upgrades and a number of other improvements. Overall, as far as planning goes, the seat count would decrease from 365 to 353. The operation would be similar to existing conditions. We really don't have limits on them. Obviously, weekends are busier, but there's just a wide range of programming: movies, live performances, educational programs, summer camps, and just a treasure to our community. The scope of work from the applicant. Here's the overall site plan that shows the addition. So the addition would be at the rear of the property along the north property line. And I don't know how they did it, but somehow with an addition, the parking count is going up from 11 to 12. And here's the floor plan of the existing theater and the addition. Exterior elevations and materials. And the massing model. And rendering from the rear. They were very fancy. We have a daytime and a nighttime. As I mentioned, the applicant will have an opportunity to give a presentation, and I'm looking to the Planning Commission a little bit on guidance on parking and loading. The requirement for churches, other places of worship, and mortuaries, meeting rooms, and performance theaters requires one space per each 4 seats, or one space for each 75 square feet of gross floor area, whichever is greater. So the existing 21,525 square foot building has an existing 365 square foot theater. There are 2 other uses at the site. We have the bar and the office. There are 11 existing on-site spaces, 12 proposed. Using the parking, the unreinforced masonry provision, if that applies, it would grandfather 72 parking spaces for all 3 of the tenants. Based on the code, if we look at the 1 space per 75 square feet, 287 parking spaces would be required. And under the number of seats, it would be 88 parking spaces. And with that, that concludes staff's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff? Keeping in mind that Mr. Ross, the architect, will also be able to answer some questions.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
It's more for clarification. I noticed that there's a credit for parking spaces that's given for businesses that are facing the plaza.
We'll go into that in detail a little bit later. That'll definitely be one of the topics of discussion, but I want to be able to pull up the code and read through it line by line. Unless it would please the chair, we could bring that up now.
No, let's do it and get past the primary presentation first, and then we'll get into the parking. Okay, any other questions? If not, I'll open up to the public, and Mr. Ross, or the applicant, or theater representatives. Please give your name and And there's no time limit, but try to keep it concise.
I'll be brief, thank you. My name's Jocelyn Vick. I'm the president of the Sebastiani Theater Foundation. And first, I'd just like to say thank you all for being here and doing the work that you do to make our community better. It's really great. We're really excited to be here tonight because this has been something we've been talking about for a long time. And we've been dreaming, and we have reality and dreams all mixed into this project, but we are very excited about getting to this point. We began the foundation in 2008 as really a fundraising entity for the for the theater, and then in 2018 we bought the business from Roger Roten, and we hired Tony Genesi as our general manager. Roger we hired as our executive director, and now that all rolled into getting this exciting new renovation and addition going. We actually would like you to come and take a tour of the building. I don't know if all of you have been, but it's pretty interesting. The projection room and the backstage area is it's unbelievable. I like to say you have to go outside to change your mind out of those changing rooms because they're so small. But at some convenient time for all of you, we would love to, sooner than later, have you come and take a tour. So I don't know how you do that, but we'd like it. And in the meantime, I'd like to introduce Roger Roten, our executive director. He's going to give you kind of the why and what we're needing to do this for. And then Michael Ross will show you the whole project. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. There's a few familiar faces there. And I think the Sebastiani Theater is something that's dear to most everyone's heart in some way or another. There's so much great things happen there. And this project is something that's needed. We're moving forward. You may notice that movie theaters are going through struggling times right now. You're seeing theaters close in lots of different places. And you might notice that we've been doing a lot more live performances there. And so we've been moving in that direction for some time. So we see that that's what is necessary to be there, and we think it's what the community wants too, is to have a bigger variety of programming brought to the theater. So I want to just explain a little bit about why we need the big space in the back. First of all, during films, if it's a major film, the first thing is they will not give it to you if you're going to take it off the screen one night. Let's say I'm going to have a live performance and at the Saturday maybe prior, and I'm trying to get this film, and then if I say, well, Saturday night I can't show your film, they'll say, well, I can't give it to you then. So there's no way to get films if you have a night that you're going to take off. And so if we had a second screen, then I could play it in the big hall, and then on the night we had live entertainment, we could move it to the other screen. So that would make things a lot easier, and we'd be able to show film and do the live performance as well. And I think that's very important. The second thing is that it would be a great screening room. You know, we do a lot of different types of films there all the time, and we have the Sonoma Valley International Film Festival. It would be a big addition for that. And so as far as film goes, and what it would allow us to do more live and not have it take away from the film. That's one of the criteria. There's second thing on that large room is we don't have any place in the back for large productions. When we have our kids' productions, they're outside. We have canopies outside, out back. You know, the weather's not good. It's not the greatest place to be. And so it's another reason why we need this large room. This large room is going to have seats that telescope out and go back in. And so that's a really important thing, is when we have large productions in some place for people to go and to be. Another area that room could be used for would be a green room. When you're having first-class performers come to your town and come to your venue, We don't have any place back there. Our dressing rooms, I don't know if you've ever been back there, but they're pretty small and not real classy, that's for sure. So we need a place for those people to be able to be, or if a band's playing, we need a place for them to be. All these things are really important, and when you start to do these different type of productions, each one has its own characteristics and things that it needs, you need to do in those type of events. And we don't have any room to do any of those things. And so not only would it be a screening room that would help us in being able to still show film, but it would do all these other things as well. And those are just really important in terms of allowing us to be to do more things. And not only that, it gives us more room for so many of the youth programs that we do there. A lot of times they need extra rehearsal space and extra places to be, and we would like to expand on youth programs and be able to have after-school programs. So it's just got so many different aspects to it that would be a big plus for us. And so we think it's really important because the times are changing. We would like to turn the theater into a performing arts and film center. And we're trying to go into a new era, and we're going to raise the bar, and we want to see what we can do for Sonoma culturally, and we work with the community in so many different ways. We're involved with all different types of organizations, groups, nonprofits. We work with everybody in the community, and it's a great community resource. So that's the reason why that is so important, to get that. The second side is what would be on the north side, and of course that has to do with the ADA bathrooms, and those are required. It's we have to do that to fulfill our lease, in fact, and there's no way we touch inside the bathrooms inside the theater without disturbing the charm and the beauty of what we have historically. And so those are necessary to have the bathrooms, and also the kitchen area. The reason for the kitchen area is actually you have to have a 3-hole sink in your place. We don't have one right now, and then so the county's been generous enough that we've told them that we're trying to get one, that they've allowed us to do what we do, but we can't serve any other food. Popcorn's it, And we would like to have a wine and beer license because we think that would generate a lot more revenue. And so if we had a kitchen, then we could serve more food. We could be eligible for applying for a license, and that would be very beneficial to the theater. So all the things that we want to do, I feel, are really important to the business itself, and we've got to make it more viable in any method that we can. And we've got to evolve with the times and change, and that's what part of this project is all about. So that's all. I want to let you know the reasoning behind it, and then I'll let Michael come up here and he can tell you the how about it. So anyway,
Okay.
I appreciate your consideration. Yes, any questions?
As part of the future performing arts aspect, are there going to be changes to the main theater space to enhance that as a?
Well, the renovation is definitely a big part of our process. The main thing would be the seating. We're going to try to keep everything as close as we can, but seating is a big issue. People have we want to make it really comfortable in there so people can come in there and enjoy it. And so new seating is definitely one of it. Plus the restoration of all the rest of the inside too. So that part will be happening also at the same time.
Any other questions for Mr. Roten? I've got one.
Okay.
I'm assuming that one of the implications of an approval, which we're not doing tonight, we're just talking conceptually, is that you will be able to engage in a more robust fundraising campaign to actually finance all these changes? Or has some brilliant billionaire come to your aid and volunteered to fund the whole project?
We're looking for him.
I see.
We're looking for him. And so any of you are watching this tonight and you're out there, well, give us a call. So.
Yeah. Okay.
But we are, we're getting ready. We've got to go through this process. We've got to, so that we can find out how much it is going to cost.
Yeah.
We got to, this is the next step. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any other questions?
No, I will just tell you a very quick story. My grandfather on my mother's side became involved with something called the Jerry Lasky Productions in the 1920s, which was one of the earlier iterations of the burgeoning movie industry of the time. He was a contemporary with Charlie Chaplin and the other notables in the very early movie industry that in the silence. And my grandfather ultimately became vice president of Paramount Films, where he was in charge of distribution. And one of the stories that he used to talk about, I guess with misplaced pride, was the power that they had over movie theaters, and basically could hold their granting of the rights to show a movie almost as a knife to the throat of a movie theater. They didn't own the theaters, but they might as well have, because their control over what the theaters could show was so powerful that it was a wedge into an industry that was just beginning to establish its roots in America.
And it's still that way today.
I know. I hate to say it's the legacy of my grandfather.
Things haven't changed.
No.
So I'd like to invite Michael Ross up. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Guys. Appreciate you listening.
Hi, everybody.
Excuse me while I get connected here.
So is it coming? Good. Okay. No, this should work. It worked just the other night. So let's see. Yeah. Let me try this. Oh, good. AV problems. Okay. Was it? Yeah. So, HDMI. Yeah.
Let's see is the second screen. So start your presentation. Is that one of the five? Are you mirroring?
Let me double check because I was mirroring in the office. Play from current slides.
I'm gonna save it to a thumb drive.
You used the same computer here the other night?
I'm gonna
I had it working for design review.
Does your resolution change that? I'm good. How about you?
There it is.
See, I think your resolution's high because it's black over there.
Okay. There it is. It's loading.
While we're waiting for that, can I try something to
Sure.
see if I can make it magically be better?
I'm loading it to a flash drive.
Oh, okay.
So what did you just do?
Just changing the resolution.
You know why this didn't work? Because you didn't, this is like the one time you didn't send it to me ahead of time.
I know.
I waited before you changed it.
Okay.
It didn't work. So
I would
hit
just
that
like to
one.
interject, in the old days, we used to just print
I
things
know.
up there and point to it, and, exactly.
Click that guy right there.
Okay.
Do it again. Put it back to where it was.
So it's still loading.
And he could change it with the.
There we go.
You should be able to.
You never know.
You never know.
He said he had the same computer.
It's a new adventure every day. I set the bar really low though, so my first hearing I locked myself out. I locked everybody out.
Oh, did you? Oh.
Almost there.
So yeah, this one's working. So there's
Let's,
something going on here.
let's plug that back into me again. Let's see if that works. We're loading it onto the city's computer.
So they might need this guy right here.
Okay.
Did you pull this one out of your own? Or
Yeah, that's mine. Yeah.
They're loading your file.
Okay.
We have that one in here. No, that's it. You'll be able to use this guy's page.
Did it work? So Christina's loading it. Thank you for your patience. Great. It was. So. Well, good evening. Little AV break here. I'm Michael Ross, architect for the Sebastiani Theater. So on Friday, April 6th, 1934, the Sebastiani Theater opened. And this is
Hey, Michael, can you adjust your microphone, please?
Sure. Okay. On Friday, April 6, 1934, the Sebastiani Theater opened, and this is an application from a 90-year-old community institution requesting your thoughtful consideration about its next 50 years. So this is pretty unique. It's not a situation where you see a user asking for a span of 140 years to be considered, what we've done in the past and where we're going in the future. Over its lifetime, the Sebastiani Theater has continuously served our community and now needs facility upgrades to support a sustainable future. And tonight's presentation briefly describes these improvements. In 1933, the theater was designed using advanced engineering technologies developed from the 1906 San Francisco fire and earthquake. It was made out of steel and concrete, and its resilience is remarkable still today, and it's a structure worth investing in. And the first movie, 1934, admission was 30 cents, and it was Fugitive Lovers, starring Robert Montgomery and Madge Evans. Madge, what happened to you? And since then, thousands of patrons, many, many movies have been projected here. Many live performances. And the theater is magic. And it's a creative spark for our community. And it makes dreams come true. And this is one of the few applications that when I make a presentation, I talk about the universal we are applying for this application. It's not just the Sebastiani Theater Foundation, and bless them, and Roger and Diana and all the families that ever worked here. It's we are doing this. And so what we're doing is preparing for the next 50 years. This is a qualitative presentation on my part. It's an emotional presentation, but it's also based in architecture, design, land use planning, and everything that you are charged with. And the key operational objectives is to restore the historic lobby in the theater, enhance the guest experience, provide comfortable seating, a wine bar, and more unique food offerings, add live performance improvements in building systems, and importantly, implement a 21-point accessibility and barrier removal program that was first identified in 2011. And then, per what Roger was presenting tonight, create a flexible movie, live performance, education, and special events venue. And so tonight we come before you with a request for a use permit that from a land use planning, architectural standpoint, the scientific word for it is it's tricky, okay? We're going to add 4,967 square feet to the north and east sides of the building. This includes the new 50-seat multi-purpose screening room. We're proposing to grandmother in the parking to the existing plaza parking plan. Page and Turnbull has done an exhaustive resource evaluation We're proposing a 12-seat overall reduction in the existing seat count. There's going to be one parking space added. I'll talk to you. That's part of the magic that I discussed with you. We're going to add the wine bar and food offerings, and virtually the existing setbacks and FAR is compliant. How are we going to do this? Well, the existing site and roof plan shows this. The yellow area is wrapping around the north side and the east side of the building, and this is going to become a very hard working space because it must adjust and accommodate 8 different changes in elevation between the second story of the theater, the fire escape from the balcony, the exiting from the real estate office, the exiting from the stage, the exiting from the main theater. It's very, very complicated. And luckily, we found during the topographic survey that the northern property line is 18 inches farther north than what the fence is. And because of that 18 inches, we're able to do what we're presenting tonight. One of the other things that I would like you to be aware of is that the new screening room is actually landing on top of an area that is occupied by Verizon's equipment. There's some telecommunications gear, and we're proposing to lift it up and place it on top of the roof, and that's depicted by one of the rectangles that you see, an arrow pointing down, relocate Verizon equipment to roof. That's part of this use permit application as well. The other rectangles you see on the roof is future PV panels that would support energy savings for the facility. Here's the proposed first floor. I'm sorry that it's so small to see, but basically per Roger's description, there's going to be 3 new restrooms, a kitchen, a series of fire exiting corridors. As it wraps around the backside of the theater, it has a series of stairways, wheelchair lifts, and improvements to the back stage area, new changing rooms, and the new green room. These are the key program enhancements: new prep kitchen, new accessible restrooms, stage door, theater, and the multi-purpose screening room, the new comfortable audience seating, the restored lobby, and the barrier removal program at the front that has already been accomplished. You've probably seen that with the new handrails and the accessible messaging system up to the main lobby. Here is the new 353 seat count, and then the 52 seat count with the collapsible seating, not unlike what we did in the Veterans Building many years ago, how the seats, they're all upholstered, but they all collapse and consolidate into a relatively narrow area at the back. This shows the multi-use aspects of it. It's the screening room is also a green room. It's a rehearsal space. It's available for private parties. It's a lecture hall. It could be a dance studio, rehearsal studio, and the front of it has a second candy counter for when it's functioning as a screening room or other use. Here's the architecture. You can see how the new addition wraps around the sides. The existing fly loft greatly is overscaled compared to the new addition. Now, day, night. And what's interesting about this is look at the wall that is along the north side. What we're proposing to do is a piece of public art that is going to harken back to old movie posters, and it's going to slide on expose itself on the outside, then slide on the inside of the lobby. So when you're into this back lobby, you'll see this public art. I'd like to do it out of tiles and photographic tiles. And so this whole piece of art is going to slide in and sort of interlace the outdoor with the in right there at the lobby, and that's the reasoning behind it. So what we're asking for your consideration is, one, any of your creative thoughts that you may have for it. Two, understand the importance it is for our community. And three, ultimately approve this so we can go forward, continue to raise the funds, build this out, and get this ready for the next 50 years. I want to thank you all for your consideration as well as for your patience getting ready for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Open it up to questions. I do have one for you before you sit down. In that last rendering you showed of the rear of the theater with the new structure, is this a single floor addition? In other words, what we see here is the height here almost looks like 2 stories, but is it actually 1 story that houses all of the interior? For example, the theater in there is a...
Great observation, Chairman Barnett. It's a double height space, and the reason for it being a double height space is because at the end wall a screen comes down, and then we have the slope seating, and so you need a view angle that goes directly to the center of the screen, so we need the loftiness in order to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions for Michael? Yes, Donna.
I have one question on one of your images. I think it was just before this particular one.
Go back.
A little bit further, right here. I noticed in the back that you have bicycle racks.
Yes.
Are you intending, but they're not on every image, so I'm just curious if you're intending to put those. That's a great idea.
Yes.
Okay.
Currently there are no bicycle racks for the theater, and so we're going to place them in the back, and not only for public use but also for staff.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And public access to the new screening room would be walking down the alley. I mean, unless you parked back there or you're in one of the lots that has access to it. Public access is going to be down the alley, around and into the back. That's going to be the access to that space?
Ideally, no, but you can use it as a separate standalone venue. But you would buy your tickets at the normal booth, and then if you walk in, and let's say one group is going to attend something in the main theater, people to the screening room would just go out the doors to the left, down the corridor past the restrooms, drop down a series of steps or use the wheelchair lift, and then enter into the screening room that way. Or you could go down and enter through the vehicle entry, the tunnel entry, and go that way.
Okay, thank you.
With this expansion, do you see the creation of more jobs in the community for all of this to be facilitated? Do you see creating jobs?
Yes, and I would like to defer to Roger and Jocelyn on that. But from my own experience, there is like when we activate the second candy counter, there's going to be high school kids behind that counter.
Sure.
And there may be a projectionist, another assistant helping run the operation in the screening room simultaneously. But if you look at our use permit application, we're looking at a very, very minor increase in staff count, 2 to 3 to 4. But I think the increased intensity of use is going to come with the flexibility. Because right now we could operate 7 days a week with what we have, but it's difficult to do so with the current facility. We're hoping for a much busier theater by doing these improvements, and therefore additional job opportunities will take place.
Thank you.
Mr. WIRICK?
So is the intended ingress is through the front of the theater?
Yes.
Okay, but it can be used separately, and the new addition can be its own separate entrance.
Exactly, and if you look further, you can see it on there. There's an accessible path of travel going to the east, and then it turns and it's going to go out to Napa. And so you can come in that way from around the LaHaye Gallery,
Right.
or you can go up through the vehicle tunnel, or you can go in through the front door.
Okay. And the windows that are depicted in that elevation are functional windows
Yes, they are.
that are just can be drawn closed.
Yeah, these are going to be acoustically rated windows with blackout shades that are on motorized controls. So on the days that it's not a theater, you can open up, let the sun shine in. It could be a great dance hall.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so this is a study session. It's an opportunity to give some opinions. By the way, let me ask if there are any public comment online?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. And anyone else here in attendance like to make some comments?
Good evening. My name is Bob Berg. I'm chairman of the board of the Sonoma International Film Festival, so I'm excited about this. We use Sebastiani Theater and have used it the entire time I've been on the board, and probably for the last 25 years. And one of the things that we would love to see them be able to do is become more robust, to have more business opportunities, and for us to have another screening room would be tremendous. I don't know how many of you attended our festival this year, but we used Prime Cinemas for the first time ever, which was kind of an experiment because we built the film festival on a walkable model. Well, you couldn't really walk to the Prime Cinemas, but they're closed now, so we're kind of jammed up for what we're maybe going to do next year. And I know this won't be ready next year unless you guys really do a great job and we raise a raise a lot of money. But I just want to lend our support and just let everybody know that we at SIF have a great relationship with Sebastiani, as does the town. So we'd like to see this thing happen as soon as possible.
Well, perhaps with your Hollywood connections.
Well, I'll have to talk to Kevin about that.
Yeah, with your there may be a billionaire out there who would like to have it be called the Darrell F. Zanuck Screening Room.
Sure.
Naming rights. You know, we're not going to rename the Sebastiani Theater. That's not changing. But there is a little extra thing in the back there that, you know, could do with a good name. I mean,
Chairman Barnett, that's not for me to decide.
maybe it'll be the Verizon screening
but I
room.
I can tell you this. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I was talking to somebody about this morning, and they're local, and they said we would be more than happy to start to contribute if we could do something like this to the Sebastiani. And I suspect there's a lot of people in town that would jump on that bandwagon. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? No? Thank you, sir. Anyone else from the public who would like to come up? Please give us your name and...
Hello, I'm Kat Austin. I've been in the town of Sonoma for a long time, and I've known some of your children and worked with them in the arts. And I'm here on behalf of Patty O'Reilly with the Sonoma Conservatory of Dance. She uses the theater for 6 performances a year at this stage. And we have up to 45, 50 dancers that come into that space in the back. And they use the stage, of course, to dance beautifully. But I'm here on behalf of the multipurpose room in the back that would benefit us tremendously with all the puffy costumes, the tutus, the point shoes. You know, they are not able to go outside in the back on the gravel and everything that some of the other youth performing groups can do that. We can't. And so we crowd all of our kids, all the way from the little bitty ones, you know, all the way up to the girls in their point shoes in that backstage area. we've also got scenery and props and, headdresses and all sorts of things, that multi-purpose room would mean a whole lot to us. And also speaking on behalf of my participation and association with Diana's show each year, the Witchy Poo Players, and just loving seeing all the kids on that stage. There's a lot of those children, and that multi-purpose room would also mean a lot in that realm. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alexis Dermeyer. I'm the founder and executive director of Backyard Kids Theater. We just performed Aladdin about 3 weeks ago at Sebastiani. We started our company. We just became a nonprofit, but I moved here 3 years ago, and we started our company about 2 years ago, and the Sebastiani has been an incredible home for us. But luckily, I'm growing, and the amount of kids in my program are growing, and I'm afraid we're going to get too big. And I don't want to get too big because we absolutely love doing our shows there. So just as, to second what Kat said, more space backstage, a second room just for the sets and the costumes in the backstage area would be crucial. The other thing is that for my rehearsals, I really don't want any child sitting down watching other kids learn. I want to be able to teach them all at the same time. And so what we do now is we'll teach one group on stage, and then the other group is out back if it's not raining, or maybe in the lobby as people are coming in, looking at the lobby. And to have a second teaching space where we could actually make sure that all the kids are up and active and learning simultaneously would be a big game changer and would be so beneficial to our company. As well as right now we are scheduling, I keep my cast pretty small, so we have multiple casts. And right now when we can't rehearse at the Sebastiani because something's going on, we rent space at the community center or somewhere else, but that's becoming a bit cost prohibitive. So if we could have a second space where we could just hold a rehearsal if there was an event going on, that would also be wonderful. So I am a huge supporter of this project, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
I have a huge selfish motive for this project. I've been able to do so many things there for 30 plus years, and it is, as we all know, an incredible jewel. And being able to increase it will make a big difference, because we lost Broadway-bound kids because we didn't have enough room. I think that we could be able to attract other venues. And as far as Teresa, I love your comment, because I know I could hire a lot more people if I were able to do more productions. The more summer camps that I have, the more young people I get to hire who have summer jobs, and it's just something that I think will really benefit the whole town. It's going to be so exciting, no matter what level we get it to, but I know we're going to be doing something really wonderful. So thank you for all you guys do.
Thanks, Diana. Anyone else? Okay, I think, as I say, this is now an opportunity for the commission to just generally chime in. I will take the opportunity of saying something before you all start, which is that this theater is really a partnership with the city of Sonoma. The city of Sonoma leases the theater from the ownership. It's got a 50-year lease. If this is going to succeed, and I'm not saying that the purpose of this theater is primarily as a business, but it does have to succeed as a business. And it has to succeed as a business not only for the theater operators, but it has to succeed as a business for the city of Sonoma, who's got a 50-year lease to pay. So this is something that I think is going to get widespread community support and widespread council support. There's nothing in it that I see that's a drawback. One question I've got is, assuming the money were available tomorrow, how long is a project like this actually going to take? What are we talking about in terms of a horizon here? Well, whoever among you feels qualified to answer.
I believe it'll take approximately 2 years because it needs to be phased. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be installed, including full fire sprinklers throughout, including the town square, and the real estate office gets upgraded, mechanical systems and things like that. If we can do it in 18 months, that would be great. But we also want to keep the theater open as long as possible, so there's going to be, maybe we'll build the sides and the back first and then close down. There's things like that that we're going to have to look at, and that'll take time, but 18 months to 24 months.
And what's been the what's been the reaction of the property owner? I mean, they're getting tremendous capital improvements on this property through a project like this.
Great question. We have a letter of acceptance and of approval from the property owner for us to do this.
Still the Goodhue family? Still the Goodhue family?
Well, they're part of it. He's not part of the management committee. They took him off a long time ago.
I see. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
You bet.
Comments, reactions, feelings?
I thought we weren't supposed to give opinions in a study session.
I didn't hear any opinions. I just heard emotional sentiments.
Well, no, I just laughed because I think everybody sitting up here has just tremendous love for the Sebastiani Theater and wants to see the enhancements happen. I think that's the easy part. I think the question we're going to get to, and I want to push back over here to Christina to say, okay, we clearly, like, this isn't a slam dunk. We have to deal with the parking issue. So I'm kind of thinking, instead of, I mean, this is all wonderful. We all love it, but let's get to the obstacles and how we can solve those.
Yeah, and I think that will largely be the topic of the next session, because it really is a continuation of the next agenda item, because this is an item that has been going on for a year. It's not a new discussion, and it affects more businesses than the theater. So I think just acknowledging the constraints and challenges, and then we'll continue the parking discussion to the next agenda item.
Okay, any other general comments, observations, expressions of feelings without expressing bias?
I do have go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead.
Well, we do. We all love this theater. I raised 4 kids in this community, and where would we be if we didn't have the Sebastiani Theater? But I've had a long history in this town in nonprofit fundraising, and it's my observation that you will, short of finding your billionaire donor, you'll find them right here in this community. You will have no problem having people donate to this cause. They'll be lining up for you. I know it.
Well, I just go back to Michael's opening and the "we" that he used. This is a community resource. I think, as evidenced by the fact that the city took out a 50-year lease on this building to make sure that it wasn't going anywhere, and so this is an important community asset that we all have an interest in figuring out a way to make this plan work. What's being proposed is very exciting, and it really takes it combines the old theater with a modern sensibility and aesthetic in a way that I think is very appropriate, and I think people will just respond when it comes time to buy your ticket. And I'm pretty excited about that backspace. I'm hoping you can have small music events up there, and that there's enough soundproofing to keep people watching the movie from wondering what's that noise. But anyway, I wish we were. I will get to the parking, but I think that this commission and the community wants to find a way to make this work.
Mr. Willers?
It's interesting that we get down to parking. My first planning commission meeting, whenever that was, the first issue that I raised was our parking standards. And I asked David Goodison then, when can we look at our parking standards? And so finally tonight, I get to look at our parking standards.
20 years later.
About 15 years later. But I put it in this context, and if the Sebastiani was to make no changes, we'd have one less parking space. And if the Sebastiani was the size that is being proposed, it wouldn't have any parking spaces to make that happen. And as the asset that we have in our community is actually that we have a community that's designed around a central plaza, buildings that face onto that, and it doesn't have anything to do with the automobile. So that's where we should be going in the future as well. So good luck.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll beat the dead horse. The Sebastiani is a cultural epicenter. I mean, it's as iconic as Sonoma landmark as the Mission or City Hall, and every bit as important. And I think it's going to be important to marshal that legacy into the future for forthcoming generations to enjoy. And this represents a good start to that. And I'll sign on with the lack of opinion, but the emotional show of support, I suppose. Thank you.
I want to know if Commissioner WIRICK was ever in Witchy Poo.
No, but Broadway Bound Kids. So I have performed on that stage. I'm a bit biased. I might need to recuse.
Okay, anyone else?
I feel peer pressure. You know, again, I'll say the same. First of all, I love old theaters, and to have a town, I lived in Philadelphia, I've lived in many places, and I've always been drawn to small vintage theaters, and I was so excited when I moved to Sonoma and saw the Sebastiani. And what Roger's done and what the foundation has done has been incredible in trying to maintain that. And I really respect that and respect where it's going, because I agree. I think that, you know, Sonoma, it's a public-private partnership. I mean, we don't really have our own rec center. We don't have a lot of these venues. And so this is an example of one of these venues, like the community center, that we use as a community. So I think this is fantastic, and you know, hope that we can be partners in trying to move this forward.
I think that's all of us. It's really, in my experience, my 30 plus years here, that the opportunity to participate in a real legacy plan is relatively rare. I mean, a lot of the decisions that get made up here in the Planning Commission, they become a legacy for a given family. If you approve a house or you approve a development, the community is going to live with it for a long time. But a public amenity that ends up a legacy in the community actually doesn't come around the corner very often. And this is in that category. It's that special. And I'm biased as well. My granddaughter spent many years up there with green face and witchy poo, and she loved it. And I think all of us feel great affection for the theater. I'll be there tomorrow night for the multiple horns and music concert that's happening. I'm taking everything back tonight. I guess it's another night in front of the TV. Brother. Okay, well, at this point, I think that concludes our study session, unless there's any other comments. I'm looking forward to hearing a number one day, and that'll give us a target, and we can all start to think about that. And thank you all for coming and saying your piece, and fingers crossed. Now we're going to move into the next item, which is the parking and loading standards. This is going to be the most exciting part of the night if you want to stay.
I'm going to stay.
Yeah. Me too. As the commission remembers, we started our conversation on parking and loading over a year ago, and reviewed a pretty comprehensive update to the parking codes. It felt like a little bit too much at the time, and what ended up going through was a pretty focused amendment to establish objective standards for fire access ways, private driveways, and private roadways. That was adopted and is in effect at this time. It's not reflected in our online code, but it should be shortly. So the discussion this evening is really looking at that next bite of the apple. So we engaged with WTrans, who looked at our parking counts and provided recommendations on our code to bring it up to date with the ITE standards. And that's a recommendation. The council can move forward with whatever numbers they would like, I believe. And just some topics for conversation are the grandfathering in on the plaza. My understanding, and Larry and Bill, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really tied to these unreinforced masonry structures, and I believe there was a list of them that were supposed to be enhanced over time. I believe 11 of the 12 have been done. So the way our parking code is written is there are sort of general requirements. Parking spaces have to be permanent, they need to be maintained. So one topic for conversation is, do these all need to be paved? Are we entertaining permeable paving, and how might that look? Under the number of parking spaces, it's governed by our table 4.4. So the recommendations from Brian are in blue, and then the red is the recommended deletion. Our code is a little overcomplicated in some instances, so we're trying to streamline as much as possible. And so I think what I'm going to recommend is just going through the table kind of one by one and getting feedback, and then we can deal with the other issues as we get to them in the code, if that would please the chair.
That's fine.
Okay. The first recommendation for general manufacturing is to change the requirement from, step. Can you help me put that back? There we go, much better. One space in 500 to one space for 1,000 square feet for general manufacturing and industrial processes. And deleting this additional provision for the first 20,000 square feet, and then having another standard for each 1,000 square feet after. Are there any questions about that?
Yes. Do we have anything that fits this category in the city of Sonoma?
Probably not.
Okay, thank you.
The next category is recycling facilities, which is by use permit. I can't imagine we're going to have any recycling facilities. The recommendation was to actually decrease research and development laboratories to 400 square feet. And warehouses and storage to increase from 1,000 to 2,500 square feet. Any comments on those?
Just curious, these are based on those standards?
These are it's based on the Institute of, I'm going to get the transportation engineers. But again, in general, the trend is moving towards requiring less parking. In many jurisdictions, cities are not requiring on-site parking anymore. I can definitely envision having two different standards, where we would have maybe a different standard in our downtown versus other areas of the city, but open to all kinds of discussions this evening.
On this item, which has to do with storage facilities, and I think we only have one storage facility in the city of Sonoma. Is this square footage pertain to the office space or does it pertain to the square footage of the entirety of the enclosed storage areas?
Gross floor area may include incidental office space comprising less than 20% of the, I believe they wanted to include all of it. That's how I'm
Okay.
reading it.
All right,
That's
I guess
That's
my
exactly why all the parking spaces at the one storage unit are always available,
yeah, I mean,
because they're not needed.
no, but generally the way these storage spaces work, people drive in, they drive to their storage unit, they take out what they want, and then they drive out. They don't park in the parking lot and walk in unless they're gonna get a storage unit, so.
So I'm not this is a study session. I think that we're going to take a while to go through this. Happy to print out hard copies of our existing code if it would help the commissioners moving forward. But I think for now we'll just kind of keep going
we're
through
fine.
the
Keep
list
going.
and get comments.
Just one, can I make one consideration is, if we use that existing storage unit as an example, how many square feet it is and how many parking lots would that, parking spaces would be at 2,500, and if it's an inordinate number, maybe we can increase this.
Well, it would be an inordinate
Yeah.
number because I would estimate that the square footage of that particular storage, I'm thinking of the one across from Maxwell Village, has got to be at least, in terms of square feet of building, 10 or 20,000 square feet of building, at least. So, and I think their parking area outside their office is 4 spaces, if I recall. Yeah, so, okay.
And then in the same vein, you know, above, research and development laboratories, bringing that down to something that's almost a commercial or retail use, to me seems, why are we doing exactly the opposite, right? Why are we requiring more parking for something that, you know, generally laboratory space is a lot of space with a couple of people working in it. You know, it's not a retail environment. It's not that kind of thing. So I'd leave that at 600. I would not reduce it to 400, and I'd consider even more. You know, we just have to, our land is too valuable here. We have to stop using every 200 square feet of space for a car. We just have to stop doing that. And so I propose that we scratch that. And leave it as it
Would
is.
1,000 square feet be too?
Well, I don't know enough about this.
Yeah.
We have another architect in is that a reasonable number? Have you done lab space or R&D space?
It's funny because we've been studying the potential of putting a climate adaptation center at the SDC, and we came across this very same calculation. 600 square feet was the county's number, and if you really want to do anything profound out there, all of a sudden you realize you're approaching 800 spaces or something based on this calculation, which is ridiculous because that translates into trips on Arnold Drive. And so I favor pushing the number up actually than down in that. And since I'm up here, on a related issue is I was walking through the parking lot behind the Episcopal Church in Spain Street, and I realized that that's a vast parking lot that is really underutilized, and it's an example if we could start getting property owners to look at shared use opportunities and things like that. That's a classic example right behind the community center of a parking resource that maybe it could become a destination EV charging area, sort of like the Tesla chargers, and anything that we could do to see these distributed parking lots utilized during off hours and pull more cars off the street.
Yeah, we're actually going to, this is a study session, so we can just talk, right?
Yeah. And the challenge with that, Michael, of course, because that's been suggested for years for private parking spaces around the plaza, the issue that comes up is liability.
Yeah.
And property owners don't want to have the burden of any liability for public parking that they're responsible for, so that's always the sticky wicket.
Yeah.
We are going to be investigating that, or hoping to investigate it. The parking management plan, as you recall, was before the Planning Commission in December, and we reviewed a draft. We got all those comments, and then got into a little bit of a contracting shuffle. We got the new contract approved, and that is what we're anticipating, looking into these new agreements, part of the first phase of implementing the downtown parking program. But of course, that will be up to council and their discretion when they consider it and approve it. But it seems like kind of a low-lying fruit is looking at around town, these vacant lots. It'll be packed downtown, but we have these vacant lots kind of surrounding the periphery.
Maybe if it became a parking district that is larger than just an individual owner.
Wait to the bottom of the ordinance
Okay.
tonight.
Long way to go.
Yeah,
we do.
I would also like to propose that we increase the storage facility. I don't know if we captured that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And I think probably, I mean, there's so much information here. I'm anticipating we're going to need to go back and really kind of digest. So I think I might suggest running through kind of quickly and then coming back in June and we can dig in a little bit more depth. A large family daycare for each employee at peak, just a clarification. A little bit of a bump up for churches, places of worship, and performance theaters. I would recommend taking off the whichever is greater. And I'm not sure what other considerations we want to make for these types of facilities. It seems like in general, our churches are downtown, one of the places where we have a lot of excess parking.
I have a question. If you took off whichever is greater, how is the decision going to be made?
Whichever is less.
Well, I mean, the question is, can we remove 4 seats, or is there a way to even
we could get rid
subsidize?
of the gross floor area and do seats. I think if you remember by gross floor area, the theater needed 280 parking spaces, which seems excessive.
One help would be to change greater to lesser.
Yes.
So we going down. Yeah.
Microphone.
These are all for new uses. I mean, existing uses do not have to comply with these, right?
Well, we have the addition though. So existing uses. Typically what we do on the plaza is we treat it like everything is retail, and has a rate of 1 per 300. And then whatever is being proposed in addition to that would need to provide on-site parking.
But I mean, existing businesses don't have to go change anything because we now require more parking.
That's what the code says right now. They do.
That's insane.
Yeah, we'll keep talking about it. So we've got theaters.
We go to arcades. I'm just thinking this through. You know, in our community, we want more walkability. So if we go back to churches, we do need access for people who have disabilities for some of those things. But when we think about all of these together again, is there? I mean, I would opt to getting rid of either 4 seats or the square foot area, but even increasing more to 250, or as a retail space, to encourage more people to walk.
Yeah, I mean, this 1 per 100 square feet. That's one of our more restrictive standards.
And the reality of the way this functions, there's a church that's on the corner of Andrew and 2nd in my neighborhood. On Sunday, you can't park in the parking lot or on the street. So what difference does it make, honestly? And that's for about a 3-hour period. And then the remainder of the week, that parking lot sits empty, doing nothing. You know, it could at least be landscaping. You know, it could at least be offsetting carbon.
That's why a lot of, they've created laws around, religious institutions to allow for housing, because they're not using their parking lots or their reduced, membership. So that is another use that could be considered too. So.
And I'm just going to go off tangent here. ITE, the context of this, there's a great thing. Go on the YouTube channel of Strong Towns, and there's an traffic engineer who did a daily YouTube video for 30 days that he titled A 30-Day Confession of an Ex-Traffic Engineer. And he discusses exactly what happens in these kinds of things. And the whole idea behind it is we've designed our communities to be not communities, to be thoroughfares, essentially, for the automobile. And it's destroyed what we love about our town. And if we follow those standards, we get that. We don't keep this. And it's really important. It's one of the most important. That's why for 15 years I've been asking, it's kind of like Infrastructure Week. When do we get to talk about this? It's one of the most important decisions we can make, because it means that we have more available land to build on and less taken up by a silly car. And they're going to have to find their way, but it's like water. You make the pipe really big, you get a lot of water. You make it small, it goes a little slower, and it finds someplace else to go. So, anyway, sorry about that. I'll be preaching.
I would just suggest uniformity across churches, arcades, and fitness clubs.
The one concern with fitness clubs would be, my concern with changing that is we do have a number of health and fitness clubs throughout the city, and so changing that could potentially create a lot of non-conforming issues, where with some of these other, like we have one theater, we don't have a lot of research and design, things like that. So just a consideration about the health and fitness clubs.
Well, I mean, I think my proposal would be that they would all be 300.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think in line with some of the comments Bill made, the question is, when you design parking, do you design it for the maximum period? And if so, are you essentially over allocating to parking? Because the maximum period, for example, in a health club, you're going to have a maximum period in the morning, and you may have a maximum period later in the day, in the afternoon, after people have gotten off work. But in the meat of the day, you're not using the maximum allocation at all. So then the question is, how do you find the sweet spot so that on those rare periods of time, for limited periods of time, you can potentially satisfy the maximum, but not end up wasting all that space during the minimum times, which is what we end up with. I mean, this is what Bill's talking about with empty parking lots.
The ITE design threshold, the holy grail of ITE design, is Christmas shopping. So to answer your question, it's maximum period. That's the amount of parking that you want to provide so that everyone's comfortable to get a parking space next to where they have to go. And our community wasn't designed that way. Our community was designed without cars. That's why the Sebastiani doesn't have 280 spaces for it.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't.
And I think there's an opportunity, maybe we'll get to it later, around how to design a district or overflow. I mean, I think, again, I say Casa Grande isn't, I know it's difficult to work with the parks.
It's not going to be a paid lot.
But I think there's opportunities there for overflow.
Yeah,
that would be
the state. The state
Yeah.
is very, very clear that that is their lot for visitors to the state parks.
I know
Yeah.
about the difficulties, and we may not ever get there, but my only point was that I think as we're going through this, realizing that we have the capacity for overflow, so that we don't have to, gear it toward those peak times.
Looking at not the maximum, but the minimum, where in here do we deal with handicap parking specifically? Because I think that's one that we really want to be able to make sure that we provide the right amount on. And then the others, it's like, yeah, we can all walk a lot further, but.
Yeah, so we do have a separate space for that, and we do need to update it to bring the language into compliance with today's standards. But that, yeah, it's a little bit further down in the code. So just moving through a little bit faster. So for group quarters, trying to just trim this down, 1.5 spaces per bed. And I think I mentioned these are recommendations based on ITE. Staff doesn't have any, preference for what the numbers are. It's just really a discussion point to start having these conversations. duplex, aligning that with what we require for a single-family residence, which is 1 space per unit. Mobile homes would be eliminating the requirement for guest parking. Multifamily, aligning it with the size of the units, 1 space for a studio or 1 bedroom, 1.5 for a 2 bedroom, 2 spaces for 3 bedrooms or more.
I want to stop there because this is always something that I brought up. We just aligned duplexes, which can be 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom duplexes, and we've provided them with 1 parking space. And so, what is the difference of that between that and a multifamily dwelling?
Yeah, I think our parking standards have never made sense to me, because in theory, I own a single family residence, and in growing up, we had at one point, 4 drivers with 4 cars. So you would think a single family residence would need more parking than the other way around. Where I worked in Marin, a single family residence had to have 4 on-site spaces, and then the smaller units required less. I think but I don't know that we necessarily want to increase our single family parking either.
And I don't think that we want to go beyond what was traditionally the multifamily dwelling parking requirement in town, and that was 1.5 parking spaces per unit, and it didn't matter how big they were. I would like to see this 1 space for a studio or a 1 bedroom, so you incentivize that, and a space and a half for all others. And then you keep it at the norm for what is the accepted norm for whatever size the unit is, and you incentivize smaller units because you don't have to use up as much land to park a car for a small unit. So that's just my 2 cents here.
Yeah, and if we want to increase our housing stock, particularly multifamily, we don't want to increase the parking requirements. So this is definitely a bad idea.
Well, it's a good idea from the standpoint that it disincentivizes larger units because you're using more land.
No, I just
mean
increasing it.
Yeah, but it's
For 3 bedrooms.
yeah.
On the other hand, you've got the contradictions and inconsistencies of current state law. When you put in an application to build a single-family home, you have to include a garage and certain parking spaces. And then, once it's built and you live there, you can eliminate the garage, turn it into a junior ADU, and you don't have to compensate for the loss of the parking spaces. Now, why would you, on the one hand, require the parking spaces in the garage if you've also created a provision to eliminate them? I mean, I don't know how to make sense out of some of this nonsense. And obviously the conclusion has been that the priority is to create a housing opportunity of an ADU or a JADU, and therefore the parking issue is secondary. And that's what the conclusion that the state has come to. I wouldn't want to question the state's wisdom, ever. But the fact is that there is an implication here that the needs of the automobile are secondary to the needs of housing. And yet, we still have codes that require accommodating the automobile. It's weird. Editorial.
Any other comments, or keep moving through?
Keep moving.
Keep moving. So on ADUs, we're reflecting the recent ordinance that was adopted requiring no parking for ADUs, as we just said. A reduction in the number of spaces for senior congregate care facilities. And I think that term needs to be changed too. I think that's supposed to be a residential care facility. I don't think we have a senior congregate care facility definition.
And so I question, so the 1 space per 2 units is the current standard that we have for senior housing, right? That's exactly what we're
The current is
required.
so for senior housing, 1 space per 2 units with half the spaces covered plus 1 guest parking space for each 10 units.
So, okay, so we've got a little bit more there.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, drive down Oregon Street.
Yeah, there's not a lot of parking.
There's a lot of parking, there's not a lot of cars.
Yeah, correct. So appliance, building, bulk goods stores. I don't know how many. We have basically a Friedman Brothers, so 600, one per 600, and I think it ends up being about the same. One space for each company vehicle plus one space for each 1,000 square feet of outdoor display area. A little complicated. Automobile, construction equipment, mobile home, machinery, and part sales. I don't.
We do have a part Napa,
We do.
O'Reilly.
O'Reilly's and Napa.
Convenient.
Those parking lots are full.
Convenience store increasing from 200 to 350. I would like to have a conversation about restaurants, especially in the downtown area. As a planner, we very regularly run into the desire for restaurants to have more seating. The seating is pretty restrictive, especially for any of the spaces downtown don't have on-site parking. And this is a challenge that comes up again and again and again. So I'm interested to see what the temperature of the commission is with restaurants.
I would definitely like to see that. So is maybe one space for 8 seats or more, because how many people are taking Uber or Lyft to go to restaurants these days anyways?
In Sonoma?
Nobody.
I do.
I would agree.
I do agree.
Take the Ubers just
Oh.
from a convenience for drinking at a restaurant, make it at home safely.
I was just commenting on the reliability of Uber.
Oh.
But I agree that there's, taxis and third party. No, I concur. I think we should open up, increase that. 1 in 10, 1 in 8.
Well, the concurrent issue with this, though, is the issue of restaurants wanting to increase their seating. Now, at this point, the parking spaces acts as a governor on the maximum number of seats that you can have in your restaurant. And if we remove the governor, how do we regulate how many additional seats they can add?
The fire code regulates it.
Well, the fire code goes up to a maximum, but I don't know if the maximum is the practical reality of what the
I think the
restaurant.
maximum for the room from the fire code standpoint is always gonna be less. The use of the space is always going to be less because restaurants are a lot of circulation. A lot of the floor area gets taken up between tables and chairs and those kinds of things. So the occupancy load of that room is the governor, the primary governor. The space use, the design of the space is the second governor.
Yeah, but you could see when the pandemic hit and the push for outdoor seating happened, all of a sudden a principle that had been in place for years in Sonoma, which had to do with not blocking the sidewalk with tables and chairs, was tossed out. And in fact, now that the pandemic's over, there are still some restaurants that have tables and chairs on the sidewalk. Even though they don't have these additional structures that we permitted, the structures have been removed, but there's still tables and chairs on the sidewalks. Now, for years, this is going back to when I was on the city council, so many years ago. The opinion of the city was that tables and chairs on the sidewalks were a danger to pedestrians and obstructing pedestrian access. And that was the reason why it was never allowed. For all these years, it was never allowed, up until the pandemic hit, and then suddenly it was allowed. Turned out it wasn't a big problem. So I think that my point is that restaurants count chairs. That's how they figure out what their maximum meal throughput can be for a day. They're always going to want to maximize chairs. So are tasting rooms, and we're seeing the same tendency with tasting rooms. So what will act as the governor? I mean, at this point, it's parking is essentially our de facto governor on the number of seats. If we change that, what's going to act as the governor as to how many seats a restaurant can add and where? And is this something that we actually feel we need to regulate? Is another question.
That was the question I was just gonna ask.
What?
That was the question I was just gonna ask.
Ask it.
Do we need to regulate that? Do we need to use cars to regulate that?
No.
It's such a backwards way of thinking about this process.
Well, so then we'll go back to the question.
So we have outdoor dining that's controlled in terms of a percentage of indoor seating. In our development
Theoretically,
code,
yes.
Theoretically, via a use permit. And so, you know, that's somewhat logical. And I get it. You know, restaurants want more seats. They want a more viable business. Is that good or bad?
I don't know. Let's talk about it. That's what we're here for. It's a hard
I
question.
actually think it's pretty good. I like having options. And I like being able to go to a restaurant and not have to, you know, wait for 45 minutes.
Have you ever been
But-
to the?
But there's a maximum because you need servers for tables.
I understand. Have you ever been to the Sushi Boat restaurant in San Francisco?
No.
Okay, it's a
I'm
big,
not a sushi
it's a big U-shaped bar.
Yeah.
Okay, and in the center of the bar is a little river, and in the river are little boats, and they're all tied
get it.
together.
Yeah.
And you sit down at this U-shaped table, and the
Grab the
boats go by, and you grab your sushi that you want off the boat, and at the end of the meal, you count your plates.
What if you capsize the boat?
I haven't seen it happen, and they move pretty slowly, and the kids love it, you know, sushi boat.
Okay.
So
what does this have to do with cars?
what it has to do with is that you can design a restaurant for maximum seats where you don't have to leave aisle space for servers.
I like that idea.
I would like to help increase the viability of the restaurants and, you know, and have it affect the parking so that people start to change their behaviors. Because if it becomes difficult to park, then that will set up the next iteration of what we're going to do about it. And I'd rather see that problem and have the land versus having the parking spaces.
Exactly. I'd rather see a difficulty of parking than Bank of America's lot sitting vacant 19 hours out of the day.
It's never full.
Okay,
And that's
24 hours out of the day.
If I could raise a couple questions to ask, so for restaurants, do we care about a difference between indoor seating and outdoor seating?
I think it's
Well,
total seating.
as Bill said, the outdoor seating is now a calculation of the indoor seats. So the question is, if you eliminate conditions as to the number of indoor seats so that there's no maximum, then you've eliminated the ratio between the outdoor seats and the indoor seats.
But there is a maximum.
Well,
So much space.
There is a maximum.
I suppose, but maybe
It's not a concert hall. It's not a
no.
stand
But
up and
I have been
crash your head, you know?
to some restaurants in San Francisco where the waiters had to turn sideways in order to get between the chairs and the tables. I mean, there's a human aspect to this about maximizing profits, and unfortunately, the number of seats are equated to the profitability of a business. So this goes back to the essential question you've asked us: should we regulate?
Okay, so then maybe we regulate the number of seats to the square foot of the restaurant rather than
There you go.
the cars to the number of seats.
There you go.
1 per 300, like retail? And then another idea is pegging it to the number of employees to try to control where the employees are parking. That would be one option. Another option I would put out there is for sidewalk seating and perhaps not requiring any parking for sidewalk seating.
But then once again, the question is, how do you limit the number of sidewalk seats?
Through our sidewalk permits.
Well, okay, and that would have to include areas of egress for pedestrians, a maximum distance, you know, onto the sidewalk, so on and so forth. It's a whole different set of criteria.
No, it does. It does already, and you can't get beyond it because there is a certain dimension that has to be allowed for public access. So the buildings on the east side of the plaza don't have that kind of flexibility as the ones on the west side, because the west side is an 8-foot sidewalk for most of it, going all the way down. You know, a lot of buildings are back from the curb line on that side of the street. So those ones have cafes on the edge. The ones on the east don't necessarily get it. The ones on the north, well, there aren't very many on the north. They're tucked in too.
Any other comments on restaurants before we move on? So the recommendation is to increase retail from 300 to 350, but then eliminating the provision for employee vehicles and outdoor display areas. Wine tasting facilities. Do we want to talk about outdoor seating? It seems to come up
I have a
sometimes.
question. What's the difference if you go back between a wine tasting facility and a wine bar tap room? I mean, shouldn't they be consistent?
That's an excellent question. The definition has to do with the type of ABC license, which is another topic of discussion because I don't know if it matters so much with the ABC licenses. They all
I
seem
would
to function
suggest
about
it
the same way.
shouldn't matter, and it gets to the conversation around changing it to square foot,
Mhm.
square foot designation versus a per seat.
Yeah, they should be treated the same. We shouldn't be regulating this with the number of cars.
Vice Chair, please remember to use your microphone. Thank you.
So for wine
You can
tasting
turn it off.
facilities, then does there seem to be consensus that the one per 300 and then similar for outdoor seating? So we're treating them the same, or I think originally it was probably to try to keep the wine tasting inside rather than outside.
Well, all of those require a use permit to begin with,
Yes.
right? And so, you know, it's the rub between the number of cars again versus the number of seats. And to me, the control of how occupied the building is the use permit, if that's the concern. If the concern is adequate parking, then you're going to use the ITE standard. You know, to me, the use permit says there's a certain level where this business fits, and that's why we're reviewing it, and there's a certain level of activity where beyond that, it's not beneficial to the surrounding area, and that's where we have to make a discretionary decision. And so the cars are kind of secondary to that decision in most cases in our community, except for the fact that there were many restaurants that weren't able to open in this community that would have served this community really well because they were short 3 parking spaces, and they decided to go somewhere else. And so that's backwards.
I totally agree. Again, I would opt for treating them all similarly, including outdoor seating, doing it by square footage. I'd rather see more consistency in the parking across any eating or drinking establishment.
And the nice thing about that too is then as uses change, they can kind of, it could be a restaurant, it could be retail, it can go back and forth without running into issues. Oh no. Banks, it sounded like there's consensus that our banks are overparked.
Yeah, can we push that up? Yeah.
500?
600, 1,000?
I would say that.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but the reality is Wells Fargo.
I think the banks should be geared to the number of bank's employees, not the square footage.
Exactly.
Because
they're the ones that are there all day long.
At the West America Bank, I was there the other day with 1 teller, 2 people behind the teller counter, and 2 people on the floor. So there were basically 4 employees at that bank in the middle of the day.
But I do think that it's hard to regulate how many employees because they staff. And they're going to staff based on what their business is. And if you go into West America Bank and there's 1 teller, you go into a credit union and there's going to be 12 employees. So, and it all just depends on staffing. So I think you really have to keep it to square foot or something more objective, because otherwise you're still going to have over parking.
I think I would also,
yeah.
go ahead.
I was
sorry.
just going to agree. I think the more we can kind of align this, I think the better. So I would agree with the square footage and just increase the square footage, versus put it, associate it with, staff.
You know, and a good example of that is Bank of America, which is essentially right next door to Chase, right? The parking lots back up to each other. Chase has like 6 parking spaces. The Bank of America has a half an acre of parking spaces. And neither one of them are fully utilized. I've never not been able to get a parking space behind Chase Bank when I go there. And when you walk in, it's like, oh good, there's someone coming in the door.
I was just going to comment, similar to how we've been doing the other zoning amendments, we can take an iterative approach, start with smaller changes and see how it goes, but definitely more research needs to be done. Oh, here's a good fun one, hotels and motels. Current standard is 1 space per each guest room, plus 1 space for each 2 employees on the largest shift, plus required spaces for accessory uses.
The problem with this is that the big hotels have restaurants and spas, so it has nothing to do with guest rooms at all in terms of day usage. Okay, but we haven't said how many required spaces there are for accessory uses.
So it would be
I see, so
the restaurant
plus,
standard.
so you would have to add the calculation on for the restaurant to fit at it.
Most hotel guests are arriving in an Uber or a cab, or they're not parking a vehicle there.
Well, some of them are renting cars at the airport and coming up and parking their rental car there. I mean, that's still happening. And so.
I have a naive question around this. I mean, this does not seem unreasonable to me, but is there a requirement to have some hotels, this new construction, actually build the parking on the hotel site to alleviate this?
I'm not understanding your question.
These are all on-site parking requirements.
On the hotel
Yeah,
site.
yeah.
Okay, that was my question. Yep. Okay.
I'm inclined to say that for now, I would keep the hotel and motel one. I think that seems reasonable.
The rationale for that is just kind of looking at the lodge and MacArthur Place and how those have been functioning, and it seems like those parking spaces are very often pretty full.
Yeah, and the issue we've had with MacArthur Place with the parking up Austin and everything, I think that the day may come where we can change that, but I just don't think we're just there yet.
I think for medical services and offices, I think that might be a little bit low, and that could go up to 500 maybe.
Yep.
Probably say medical and dental. Hospitals we don't regulate hospitals. Well, the buildings are all through the state. The district. Yeah. Pet grooming.
Well, they could go up to 500.
Yeah.
I mean,
The
it's
hospital
a
makes
drop
no
off.
sense.
Yeah.
1 space for each person in the hospital. Who's really, somebody drives you to the hospital.
Right, Larry?
Oh, yeah. Steve knows about that.
Usually someone drives you, 1 car, to the hospital, and someone visits you.
Yes.
That's where the cars come from. You know, it's not the person in the bed. It's the person in the bed that's generating the traffic.
But they don't visit all day.
No, they don't.
I don't think it matters because we're not really going to deal with that, but yeah, I think that number could go up too. Pet grooming could go up too.
Yeah. Service stations. I don't know that do we need to require parking for service stations? It's more like the convenience store use.
Well, here you've got storage facilities again. Didn't we have that earlier? We were talking about it.
Yeah, this is like personal. I don't know what that other one is. I'll have to check the definitions.
Okay, well, 'cause this one makes more sense. One
Yeah.
space for every 100 storage units. Now we're talking.
If we go back to service stations, I would agree. I mean, to increase that, maybe to 600.
3 spaces for each service bay. Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Do
That's
people,
crazy when you look at the corner of Fifth and Napa.
Oh, but that
that's a
operation
small
is just,
place.
But that's,
Yeah.
no, not the,
Fifth and
Pacific,
Napa.
yeah.
the one on across the street from Sonoma Market.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, Pacific Rim.
no, that one's
Pacific Rim.
constantly mobbed.
That's not a service station.
No, that's a
Joe.
repair
That's
shop.
a vehicle repair. Right? You're talking about,
Service bay.
It used to be a gas station.
but wouldn't that be the vehicle repair and maintenance garage?
Yes.
But they still,
Double and triple parked
Yeah.
there.
No, they're tandem parking. You
Right.
can't do anything there yourself.
One space per bedroom for a vacation rental seems a little high.
Too high.
Well, we don't allow vacation rentals in residential zones.
We just have our legal non-conforming and ours that are approved with use permits is all, so there's not that many.
Perhaps most of the vacation rentals are single-family homes, so perhaps it should be the same.
One per.
One per unit.
Yeah.
What about the vehicle washing, 4 spaces? I mean, 'cause that's,
Yeah, usually you're kind of in and out.
that's who's parking. You're not.
The employees.
Unless you're having your car service, I mean, you're not parking.
Mhm.
I would suggest that the veterinary clinics be the same as the dental, whatever we decide on.
Okay, this is the really exciting part. So this is there really is nothing that tells us how to grandfather in parking on the plaza.
You mean grandparent?
Grandparent, excuse me.
Yeah, I'm just,
Get my terminology correct. So the current code, let me just pull that up so we can see a clean version. So this is what we utilize for it, but it really does not mean how we use it.
what are we looking at?
And under F, existing unreinforced masonry structures and structures adjoining the plaza.
Well, we only have one left, you said.
Correct. And so then, the recommendation is to let's just make this structures facing the plaza.
Yes.
So it currently reads, for unreinforced masonry structures designated by the city in compliance with Government Code 8875 and existing structures that face the plaza, additional parking shall not be required for a new use unless the new use results in one of the following: an increase in the square footage of the structure, or an off-site parking requirement that exceeds 1 space per each 300 square feet of floor area. Additional off-street parking shall only be required for the expansion in building area or as associated with the increased parking ratio as applicable. Then I'm going to pull up the draft language.
So for instance, with the Sebastiani Theater, that means that even though they're reducing the number of seats, because they're increasing the square footage, we'd put a parking requirement on them.
Yes.
Right.
We have to figure that out.
Well, and I was thinking about that, and that's why I asked that question. If you grandparent in the facing, it gives them a lot of parking, and then if you consider that what is the additional, it's 4,900 square feet,
Mm-hmm.
and if you kind of divide that, it's like 10 spaces, so it's like 13 spaces in the back. So that's why I was trying to bring that up earlier, that I'm thinking that the combination of this credit plus the 13 spaces, if we account the 13 spaces for the addition, it may be doable.
The hard thing we have to remember the other uses though as well. We have the bar, which that one's up. I feel like we need to eliminate why do we want parking for bars? Maybe for the employees? That, I always thought that was weird. Yeah.
Tap rooms,
Yeah,
right?
we require parking for bars. Yeah. I think, or is it by seats?
Wine bar, tap room?
That
4
says,
seats. But then didn't you say?
Yeah, I think we
That
should
says
just,
Suggested making it
300,
300.
yeah.
Well, if we increase that, because there will be an employee or
Yeah.
two or whatever, so I think, We do have to separate that out because hopefully people are not driving themselves to the bar.
All right, so going back down to the plaza, so the current grandparenting ratio is 1 space for 300. Is there interest in changing that or keep that as is and change the other requirements?
I think the plaza should be unrestricted.
Parking on the plaza?
Here, I don't think that any additional use on the plaza should be.
Commissioner Willers?
I don't think any additional use on the plaza should be held to an additional parking requirement.
And so how do we define that? Is it facing the plaza? Is it the
I-
plaza retail overlay zone?
I think it's the, yeah, I think it's,
retail overlay zone.
yeah. That's part of, I was gonna say there's a line around the plaza.
There is a line around the plaza. Yeah,
is
so
it.
like we did a parking exception for the bakery on East Napa Street. So it's off the plaza. Would that, I'm just raising the questions, Cafe La Haye.
Well, I think we all know intuitively what those buildings are, right? It's the historic, it's essentially the historic fabric of the core, right? It's not the marketplace, you know. It's the plaza and the little leaks down the edges that are the historic buildings that are there.
What's the
that are
historic
reutilized.
overlay zone? How does that relate to the plaza retail area?
The historic overlay zone, I can bring up the map, but the historic overlay is
How
half
about
the
the
size of the
registered,
city.
all the buildings that I'm talking about, I think, are in the registered plaza district, right?
The historic district.
Yeah, the national district of the plaza.
Well, but you would, if you asked me to define what constitutes the area I think you're talking about, essentially you've got the 4 streets that surround the plaza itself and the buildings. You've got a certain distance down Broadway, probably to the post office, you know, a block. You've got East Napa Street, a block. You've got nothing really to the north of First Street, on First Street East or west of the plaza. I mean, there are some tasting rooms now and things up there, but
There's a restaurant there,
the depot?
Tosca.
Oh, I'm not, on Napa Street, yes, I was talking about First Street. So you're gonna go a certain direction west on Napa Street. And, you know, it's basically a block in any direction from the plaza is what you come down to.
So
So
this
the
is
yellow line.
The gold line.
Yeah, the
that's
gold line is the plaza retail overlay zone.
Now, a lot of that includes restaurants.
Yep.
So if you're proposing, so the proposal would be that there would be no limitation in this area for any commercial business.
It's just it's a fundamental flaw. You end up saying you can't do that because it's this dichotomy. We love our plaza. We love the way that it is. We don't want it really to change in character. We want it to be more dynamic. But then we say, okay, you as a business, you can't do something because you can't park your car. You can't park the cars.
Yeah, I would be in favor of deregulating parking for the Plaza Retail District overlay. And I think it's self-regulating. There's only so much space for
Other than
new development anyway, for new.
And
for
this
new uses.
overlay zone pretty much covers what I was talking about.
Covers exactly
Yeah.
what I was.
On First Street, on West Napa Street, it cuts off the
A little bit.
Dieter buildings.
Yes.
And there's 2 businesses in there that serve food now. I would actually suggest that it be moved down, but that isn't part of this discussion, but,
Well, if you consider the yellow zone, maybe it's an 80-20 rule. So maybe you're capturing 80%,
move this over.
and of the 20% you're not capturing, you know, they're still subject to this increased 300 whatever feet for 300 square feet.
just make
Okay.
an exception for the
But-
Plaza Overlay District.
But
doesn't
let's
require it.
let's be a little cautious on that because if I look at West Napa and you know someday a hotel could go in there, what are we doing?
Someday.
Yeah. What I mean, what
No,
are we doing then if we're
it's
saying?
it's the expansion of an existing use. And again, you can do it in a way that it's an expansion of an existing use to a certain threshold. So you do control it. But a new use would be subject to the standards.
Uh-huh.
Would there be value in creating a different district specifically for parking?
I think that'll take us too
We have
long.
a long way to go there too, you know, it's like, we have to get land.
Right.
Well, if Casa Grande is going to be now paid parking, there may be an incentive for them to build a structure or something there.
They're not going to do it. I suggest we give this another 15 minutes, and then we'll come to a conclusion.
Implementation of what could be considered a parking district. And so this is another option, is instead of just eliminating the parking requirements, just allow them to be satisfied through the payment of a fee that could go into a fund to help pay for alternative transportation and parking improvements. So this is where this section we're still in this plaza parking, and the additional language is off-site parking requirements may be satisfied through a fee paid to the downtown parking district. And then the downtown parking district, it's actually way at the bottom, so I'll skip down there. This language still needs to be revised. I'm still grappling with how this would actually look in my head, but at the bottom would be the designation of the downtown as a parking benefit district. The purpose would be to improve mobility, safety, and access in a designated area by reinvesting funds generated in that district, by augmenting local infrastructure and programs, and managing its transportation resources appropriately. The district improves its economic viability and prevents parking and other spillover issues. We have definitions, and I think where I got a little bit hung up was the disposition of the revenue and the advisory committee.
May I ask you a simple question?
Mm-hmm.
And it goes with that, what you're just talking about, but what are we going to do? I mean, you know, increasing public transportation is probably limited. So is the idea that you would use these funds to build something like a parking area? And if so, where would we do that in this city?
I think there are a lot of different options. We could look at shuttles for a farmer's market, 4th of July, things like that. Car share, ride share, I mean, there's so many different options. We could buy a piece of property and build a parking garage, or we could subsidize subterranean parking garages. I don't know. I don't really. Do you have comments?
No, well, what I was going to say is I think parking districts have to have a project.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, putting a parking district in our program, it's kind of chicken and egg. You know, you got to raise the money to have a project, but you have to have a project to have a district. Mm-hmm. And I've been held hostage to in lieu fees for a city that had a district that supposedly had a project, and this was 20 years ago, and the project hasn't been built yet. And so, you know, either we have to have a project, or we're really not doing anything except for collecting money and administering the money, right?
Yeah, and then just the fundamentals of it too. There's an advisory committee to make recommendations to the mayor and city council. And
how about a fund to pay for liability insurance for those parking spots at churches, et cetera, that we would like to be able to utilize?
Well, I think that's really great. I think that's a great solution, but you have to, I think that kind of project has to be first. You kind of scope the project, and then you go out and then you tailor this to fit the fundraising for it, rather than having a district and then trying to go find a project to spend the money.
I mean, I would agree. I think the potential of a parking district would be great for the general plan. You know, it would be great to figure out how we would flesh this out and how we would use it. So that we can take the time and really think about it, define that project, and then implement something needed to pay for it.
Yeah, identified as one of the options in phase 1 or phase 2 of the downtown parking management plan. So that's going to be subject to direction by council when it goes there. So the direction would come from council if they want to do the district or not. I just wanted to put out there the work that had been done by W-Trans and what it could look like, just to help facilitate the discussions tonight. But yeah, this is definitely a long-term issue. I'm envisioning, that would be a separate piece down the line for sure, compared to what we're talking about with the traffic counts.
And I think that if you're going to create a downtown parking district, I think it would need to be generate its revenues uniformly to any business that's located in that district, much like a business license or any other regular payment that goes into the fund. As to the question that was asked of where or what, I've long felt there was an opportunity where the post office is. That property on which the post office is located is not owned by the United States Post Office, it's leased. Somebody owns that property. You could, the city could acquire that property, put the post office underground, put some parking underground, and build 1 or 2 stories above it to create a multi-use structure, and the post office could still be there. I mean, they're just parking their trucks overnight in the parking lot that they've got, and so
Post offices are dinosaurs.
yeah, of course. So there's a way of envisioning.
I don't know. I have an Amazon and Nordstrom issue. I go to the post office a lot.
Okay.
There's a way of envisioning, a project, and there's a way of envisioning a revenue source, and I think it's worth exploring. And how exactly those revenues get used, whether for a new structure that gets built or for funding joint agreements with private property owners or other, I mean, those are all legitimate things to explore. But that's going to be a city council decision. It's not going to be ours.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, is like the plan should have, the program should have structure, and then you fund it, rather than just raising funds.
Yeah.
I know we're getting close to time, so I think the last issue I'd love to discuss is loading space requirements. And maybe let's start with our existing code. It's a little bit crazy. So loading space requirements, first of all, it's confusing. Non-residential uses shall provide off-street loading spaces in compliance with the table below. Requirements for uses not listed shall be determined by the city planner or the planning commission as applicable based upon the requirements for comparable uses. So we have the standards for the loading zone area, that not proposing to change that, where they should be located. And then we have different standards based on uses. So commercial and other allowed uses, 1 space per 10,000 square feet of gross floor area. Manufacturing, 1 per 10,000. Office uses and public uses, 1 space per 25,000 square feet. Multifamily residential, 1 space per 25,000 square feet.
That's a loading requirement? That's a loading requirement for multifamily residential?
What's the rationale behind that?
I don't know.
Could be moving, right? It's moving. It's bringing in, or renovations, that they're doing.
Amazon.
Yeah, or Amazon. I don't think these are unreasonable.
They run into, so I'll give an example of a project that's about 60,000 square feet. So then they would require 6 loading spaces. So that's at any one time with 6 vans and semis be coming and parking at the same time.
And what is that? Is that a commercial? Is it a distribution center? I mean,
it would be a commercial use.
So a hotel of 60,000 square
Yes,
feet
let's say there's a hotel
would have
with
to have 6 loading docks.
6 loading docks per our code.
Well, that's crazy. Particularly crazy since we've built hotels with no loading dock.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, how did the lodge get built without loading?
I'll tell you that story some other time.
So the recommendation would be, 0 to 10,000 to 99 would be 0, and then 1 for each additional 40,000 square feet. So the hotel would have 2 instead of 6.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, that seems reasonable too.
How big are these spaces? They're 12 by 40?
12 by 40 with 14 feet of vertical clearance.
And so you don't need it, again. But in most multifamily housing projects, the size of the units can be, they're not going to be 5,000 square foot single family homes, so moving vans can be 40 people.
Yeah.
So,
And if they do, they're probably parking on the street because that's going to be easier and closer to their unit.
so, you know, maybe a 12 by, maybe a 12-foot wide by typical depth, 20 or 24 feet of depth is a more reasonable standard for the multifamily loading area.
You keep the other side for the other.
For the other one, yeah, where you might have a big truck delivering, you know, the example is someone comes to drop off the beer. They don't drop it off in a little van, they drop it off in a 40-foot container because they're dropping it off everywhere.
And typically what they do around the plaza is it's one truck that's delivering to all the different, and they stop, they unload, they drive a little bit more, stop, unload, drive around, stop, unload.
So we've just codified a residential component for commercial parcels over a half acre.
Mhm.
At 100% of the square footage of the commercial.
Mhm.
The parking requirement and the loading dock and loading zone on these things would then be calculated based on both of those components, both the commercial and the residential?
It's offsite.
Well, that's my question.
So the residential wouldn't require, so the way that it's written right now is loading space shall be provided for retail, wholesale markets, warehouses, hotels, hospitals, laundry and dry cleaning facilities, and other places where large amounts of goods are received and shipped. So where previously multifamily required loading, this new recommendation does not.
Okay, so I'm just throwing out this idea here that we've created a new kind of project requirement in Sonoma that is going to have potential for loading issues, because we've got a loading issue, if I understand it correctly, for these multifamily developments. And so you're going to have that plus whatever the loading requirements are for the commercial development. So there'll be a multiple calculations on this.
So I think if I currently, per our current code, we would have 1 per 10,000 for the commercial uses, and then 1 for 25,000 for the multifamily. The recommended language is eliminating the requirement for the multifamily. So it's just one calculation for all of these uses based on the size.
Well, I see it as problematic for if in fact we do get a project that's a combination of both types.
Mhm.
If this doesn't accommodate it.
So in that case, it would be, so there would be 2.
All right. Well,
we covered a lot.
We covered a lot and came up with a lot of questions. This is it's a very interesting discussion. So we'll have to continue it. At this point, Laura, do you have any parting words or issue updates for us that you'd think would be important?
I think the city manager mentioned last evening at the council meeting that they anticipate hopefully a new director within a few weeks, within about 3 weeks. So that is good news. So, but in the interim, another interim after I'm gone, David Gouen is going to be, if you can't reach a staff person, he would be the next person over the next few weeks until the new director starts. So, but other than that, thank you all. It's been great. It's been
All right.
fun.
And are there any further comments from the commission or the commissioners that you want? Here, let me open up the public hearings.
as you saw, I sat back like a church mouse, but I was very, again, pleased with the kind of dialogue that we had tonight. I think the thoughtfulness, the clarity, and also the direction from staff. This is what I want to see. This is what I want to see when we gather for the general plan. Because what I'm concerned about, and can we unrecord this? Is there a point where I can get unrecorded?
No.
All right, end the meeting and then I have a post comment.
Okay, I hope we're not circumventing.
Before you end the meeting, I just have a comment. I just want to thank Laura, myself. You've really been great and just brought some real professionalism and just low-key, calm, taking care of business. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a comment in that same thread. I think one of the hallmarks of a professional is a portability of skill, and to be able to, just plug into a place and try to get that context and translate your skill set to a new environment is you're obviously very good at it, and thank you for all you've done for us in this short amount of time, and I hope it's been a positive experience for you too.
Yeah, and I would like to echo that. I mean, as a new commission member, I really appreciate the mentoring that you provided me, and I really hope you have a great time in your full retirement.
And I too, as an old planning geek, the last few months have actually been the most efficient I've seen this process, and a lot has to do with Christina. But it's also the dynamic. You can tell the dynamic is different, and it's really been noticeable. So it's been nice having you here. Thank you.
All right, with that, I'd like to hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and we don't need a vote.